All right, you are being officially recorded so that you can review it later. All right, so what we're going to do is go through the BRBC because hell, who doesn't want to spend an afternoon going through a car form? um, but it's important. We've been talking about it for about a year. What I noticed, what Jessica did one the other day, and what I noticed is that from when I first did one to when she did one the other day, which was probably about 3 months, they've already changed the form. So part of what we're going to do is we're going to get into it. We're going to go through it paragraph, break it down, talk about what I think are some of the highlights that are important, um, get you in a position to be able to discuss it with a client pretty effectively. But the moral of the story here is, man, I mean, it's like anything buyer related in car forms right now. It seems like it's changing every week. So just because we're doing it today doesn't mean that it's going to be the same. Let me see if I can share my screen. I want to give you guys this one. And away we go. Whoa, a bunch of other stuff came up. Hold on, let me clear it out of here. You guys see that? All right, good. Okay. Not going to go through the agency relationship. This is this form comes across, you get the agency relationship with it right away. It's the same old agency relationship that is in part of every transactional form that we have. So we're not going to go through that. Okay. Agency page 2. Fair housing. It also comes auto-loaded with fair housing. We're not going to go through that because that's horrible. I've got participant screen right there. I'm trying to move some tiles around so I can actually see the form. It also comes with wire fraud. This pops right out. And then we get into the heart of it, the buyer broker compensation agreements. Let me do a little bit of cheating here and pull it up on the iPad so I can see it, not behind all these boxes that I have. Okay, so the first line there that we're talking about, this is going to name your client. If you've got 2 clients, you're going to name both of them. Obviously, the brokerage, the begin date, and then the end date. This one's going to kind of depend on how things are going with that client and what your comfort level is, and how that whole initial conversation went. It might be, in order to get them comfortable, it might be 10 days. You might have to say, you get a client that says, hey, I really don't want to sign anything. They might have to give you a 10-day agreement. And then once you lock them in a little bit more and you guys are comfortable with each other, you can do an extension. This form is not unlike a listing agreement in that the terms can be modified. The term can be extended. You can modify it with an addendum. You can extend it with an ETA. You can do all of those things. Treat it like a listing agreement. Paragraph 2, or item number 2, is affirming that this client doesn't have any other buyer broker agreements with any other agent, right? So if they do, you'd want to name them there. You'd want to specify them there. Or that line might say, see addendum 1, and you might have the details of any other agreement that they have that's applicable at the time on an addendum. These are a little bit different than a listing agreement in the sense that it's possible that they could have a compensation agreement, a BRBC agreement with another agent that is still active and hasn't been released when they sign one with you. Damien, what do you mean? I can see that it's possible that, buyer A goes out and they're looking at properties with an agent in Roseville. Okay. And the person in Roseville got them to sign one of these agreements for a 30-day term. And then they decided to come to Auburn, and they wanted another agent that had a local knowledge of in Auburn. And they ended up signing a different one with Auburn. The thing is, both of those agreements could still apply. So you got to be careful, and you got to ask a lot of questions when you're having that initial talk with the prospective client. Have you worked with other agents? Yes or no? If yes, what paperwork did they have you sign? Find out if there's one of those out there, okay? Paragraph 3 starts to get into a description of what you are contracting to do for them, okay? So you can do it location. That can be anything. That can be a general thing, like Jessica's one here says Northern California, anywhere in Northern California. And if you showed these clients, you would know why that was important. It can specify by a city. This is good for any property in Rockland. Okay. It could specify in a county. This is good for any property in Sacramento County, any property in Placer County. It could specify by price range. We're going to look from $500,000 to $600,000. Could specify by other, enter whatever you like. Or it could have all of those things specified. My personal preference for that particular section of the form is to be as vague and wide open as possible, to give yourself as much coverage as possible. You go into 3B. It can be for one property or a couple of properties only. This could be property specific. Or C, there could be a list of properties on an attached document that this related to. Again, in my mind, the best thing to do on paragraph 3 is to stick with A, leave it as broad as you can possibly leave it, and give yourself the most opportunity for coverage under the agreement. Once you get into item 4, you get into compensation. It starts out with a nice little notice that compensations aren't fixed by law. They're set by individual brokers. They're negotiable, okay? There's a lot of negotiable compensation language floating around out there. And then we have ways to be compensated. Buyer agrees to pay broker as follows: a % of the acquisition price and blank, or you could just have a percentage or an and, you could have a flat fee there. Number 2 is just a blank check mark or. The way that Jessica executed this one and the way that I'm going to suggest that you execute them for the time being is pursuant to the compensation schedule attached. When we scroll through this whole thing, you're going to find at the end an addendum. The addendum basically says broker is going to be compensated per the cooperating commission posted in the MLS. In the event that there is no cooperating commission posted or offered, broker and client will discuss compensation in advance of writing an offer, right? So what we're saying is, at this point in time, we're able to get paid in a co-op from the MLS. If things shift during the term of this agreement and suddenly I don't have a co-op available, you and I, client and I, are going to discuss how I'm going to get paid, and we're going to agree to what that is before we write the offer. There's more on that farther down in the form. Okay. By the way, if you have questions or you want to stop me or anything comes up in between, turn on your microphone and chime in and say, hang on a second. Okay.
Hang on a second.
Hanging. Go, Steve.
So I've seen some that are like at 1%.
Yes.
So in that, should it say maybe a minimum?
Okay, good. We're gonna get to that a little bit farther down, but yes, if you want to establish a minimum because some of the cooperative compensations are shrinking in the MLS, I would go to checking the number 3 box and specifying that in an addendum in the back. So it might say something like this, Steve. Broker to be paid as per the cooperating compensation in the MLS at a minimum of 2.5. Okay. If compensation is not 2.5, buyer and broker to discuss method of compensation prior to writing an offer, something like that. So great point. Good job. Anybody else, or did that answer it, Steve?
Perfect.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah. So how often do you guys run into competitive agreements that are already out there?
Right now, great question. Right now, not at all, because nobody's doing them.
Oh, this is new. This is new.
Yeah, this is fairly new, and there's very few people doing them. So right now,
Perfect.
not many at all. In the future, in the near future, I think a lot more. There's already brokers all over the area are already trying to figure out how to get their people schooled on these and starting to say, hey, these are mandatory. There's one brokerage in Auburn right now that I'm aware of that it makes it absolutely mandatory. They won't pay on a file unless this is uploaded and signed. Once we get through the compensation details in A, we get into what's pretty specific, and that is jumping down to B1, there's different levels of broker participation in which we get paid, right? Non-exclusive, exclusive, and then what I like to call like just cuts. All right. Um, most of our stuff in order to impart value is going to have to fall into the default, which is broker involvement, non-exclusive representation, B1. Okay. B1 says, look, you're only going to have to pay me if I do these things and I'm involved in the property that you buy, right? And that's, in my mind, what makes the most sense to people as to why they might want to pay you, because you actually did something, and you did something on the property they ended up buying. Okay. There's a list there that we're not gonna not go through in detail, but it's showing the property, submitting an offer for them on the property, helping them with inspections, gathering information. If you do that, item B1, then you're going to pay me a commission. Okay. That's easy for someone to swallow. B2, exclusive. It's exclusive and irrevocable. The broker is going to devote time and resources to help you, but I'm entitled to compensation whether you buy the property that I show you or don't. Okay. Even if you have to pay somebody else, you're still going to pay me because you check that box. I feel like that box is going to scare people, and at least in the beginning of things, we're not gonna want to try and shove that box on anybody. That makes it sound like what all of the fear stories are based on, which is, oh God, you're making me sign something. Oh God, I'm going to have to pay you and I don't even want to use you. You know, all of those things. So we're going to skip that. We're not going to use that. And going along with the or is that the buyer includes any person or entity or other than the broker related to the buyer who in any manner acts on buyer's behalf to acquire the property described in paragraph 3. Okay. What that says is, you know, buyer Joe signs an agreement with Steve. Buyer Joe wants to get out of his ability to pay Steve. Buyer Joe has his sister Ann buy the property instead, but buyer Joe moves into it. Steve's still going to have to get paid, even though technically buyer Joe didn't purchase the home. Okay. We get into the, what am I on? 4C cancellation rules. Okay. Either party can cancel unless you check box C2, in which case neither party can cancel. Okay. I don't think that we're going to be able to sell C2. I think that we're going to stick to either party can cancel. Either the buyer or the broker under C1 can cancel the agreement by giving written notice to the other. Let's talk about written notice. An email is written notice. All right. A text message is probably written notice, but I would say, hey, you're going to need to send me an email if you want to fire me. Okay. You can change or specify the amount of time that they have to cancel after receipt by checking the box and entering a date. Okay. So you can shorten that up to a window if you want. Even if they cancel, you're entitled to compensation if you performed your duties on a house that they end up buying. So the buyer still owes the broker commission for any house that was purchased during the not during, but after the term, if the broker fulfilled his definition of involvement, that's what we talked about way up in B1. Okay, so you do a bunch of work, they end up canceling your agreement, they buy the same house that you did a bunch of work on, you're entitled to compensation. Okay, are we doing good so far? Accounting. I think this one is something that is going to have to get highlighted. You need to let them know right up front that let's use a round number so that we have some basis of what we're talking about. Let's say that you execute an agreement that says, I'm going to get paid 3% by you, my client, if you buy a house. Okay, and everybody agrees to that. If you get money that comes to you and you've been paid your 3%, you agree to credit the extra money to the buyer. If you receive money from a third party that exceeds your agreed commission, you agree to credit the cream to the buyer. So let me retract. Let me say you agreed on 2.5 with your client. You ended up negotiating a contract with the seller, and that seller, don't get hung up on vocabulary, that seller paid you in way or another 3%. Okay, you agreed at 2.5, the seller paid you 3, you're going to give the 0.5 back to the buyer. Transparency. And then number 3, D3, this is where the buyer authorizes by default or does not authorize by selection. The buyer authorizes you to include language or documentation within their offer for the seller to compensate you one way or the other. This is how we get to, I'm going to submit my offer for my client, and within that offer, I'm making a request that the seller credit 2.5% to selling agents or selling brokers compensation. We'll get into that a lot more if it ever comes up for you, okay? The idea here generally that you want to focus on with your client is, number one, there's transparency, and number two, in my mind, what I want to tell them is you're never going to pay more than you agreed to, and most importantly, if there is funds in excess of what you agreed to pay me originally, you're going to get that. It's going to flow through. You're going to get that, and some of it's going to come back to you, right? So theoretically, you agree to pay me 2.5. I go out and get 3. You get 1 back. Okay. Number E, or letter E rather. How long are you entitled to a compensation following the expiration of this contract? Okay, I think you're going to have a hard time getting more than 30 days, but you can put in whatever you want there. You could put in 365 days. You could put in 60 days, but I think that, realistically, you're going to be able to put in 30 days. Keep in mind, protection of the buyer, the state's protecting the buyer. That doesn't mean that your agreement expires. You've got a 30-day clause. They go out and buy any property and you're getting paid. There had to have been, here's this new key phrase we're going to have. There had to have been broker involvement in said property. Okay. You would have had to meet some of your duties with that property that you were trying to go get a commission for. You had to show it. You had to break it down on MLS. You maybe wrote an offer on it. You gathered reports, pre-list reports, and sent them on to your buyer to pursue the property. Some kind of involvement you had. Now, if that happened and you're your agreement expired and they went out and bought it with somebody else, you're entitled to get paid. Okay? More protection for you. Disclosure of anticipated payments to broker by others. Okay, so number one, prior to writing an offer on a property, or if you check the box prior to showing the property, you're going to disclose to the buyer the amount of compensation you expect to receive from a third party on that property by providing the buyer with one of two things, or one of three things. Number one, you can give them a copy of the MLS sheet and say, hey, look, there's a 1% or a 2% or a 3% commission, cooperating commission paid by the seller. That comes off of whatever we agreed that you were going to pay me. Okay. Number two, a separate document such as an anticipated broker compensation disclosure. That's a new form in zip forms. Okay. You can give them a form as part of their offer package that says, I'm going to get paid this much. Okay. But bottom line, if you are going to get, you're going to get paid in some kind of cooperating commission or some kind of third party commission, I guess we're calling it now, you have to disclose that to the buyer before you write the offer. Talk about the timeline again. And if I get repetitive, I'm sorry. When you met the client, you signed this form. They agreed to pay you a certain amount of compensation that could be affected possibly by a cooperating compensation. You get to the point where you're going to write an offer on a property. There is a cooperating bit of compensation being paid on the property. You're giving this client notice before they write the offer that the agreement that you and I executed is going to be affected in a positive way by this amount of compensation that's co-op commission. Everybody's happy. Okay. Through escrow, you must disclose the final compensation that you receive from anyone other than your client. I'm not quite sure they thought that one through, because commissions don't show up on a buyer's estimated closing statement unless the buyer paid it. So at this point in time, if you received a credit from the listing agent to your commission, for example, that's not going to show up on the buyer's closing statement. You would have to disclose that verbally, or you would have to give them a copy of your commission statement or something. You would have to somehow disclose it. I don't think they thought that one all the way through. It's probably going to change. And then the buyer is responsible for payment of compensation if the third party does not pay as anticipated. Right? That should already be covered in your agreement. This is a reinforcing line that says, hey, look, we agreed that you're going to pay me 2.5. We agreed that you're going to pay me 3. I was told that I was going to get 1. They backed out. You're still on the hook for 3, not 2. Does that make sense? Item G talks about the timing of compensation, when it's going to get paid, when it shall be paid. It's basically closing. Okay. But number 2, it's a little bit of fun. What happens if the transaction falls apart? If the acquisition is prevented by the default of the buyer? Okay. For example, you get into escrow, you're marching right along, you've done everything that you're supposed to do. The buyer is supposed to has been pre-approved and is supposed to provide loan documents. Okay. Comes right down to it. They can't qualify for the loan. They're in default. You theoretically could pursue them for a commission. I don't think it's a good idea, but this will allow you to do that. Okay. If the acquisition is prevented by a party to the transaction other than the buyer, when the buyer collects damages by suit, settlement, or otherwise, compensation shall equal 1/2 of the damages recovered, not to exceed the amount of compensation provided for in the agreement. After first deducting payments, blah, blah, blah. Let's break that down. Okay. The seller breaches the contract. The thing falls apart. Okay. Oh God, my battery's dying. Can you go get my plug out of my office, please? Seller breaches the contract. Deal falls apart. Buyer sues for damages. Okay. Buyer gets an award, $10,000 for damages. Out of that $10,000, buyer is obligated to pay your commission up to the full amount, not to exceed half of their settlement. Yeah. So if by chance your commission was $5,000, that's what your agreement was, the buyer only received $6,000 in settlement money from their claim, you'd only get to collect 3. You don't get to collect the 6. Make sense? Hold on, guys. I got to plug in. It's alive. No questions? You guys are way better at this than I did. I am. I had to reread it. Buyer hereby revocable payment through escrow. Pre-existing representation and completion agreements. If the buyer acquires a property during the time, buyer is obligated to compensate another broker identified in paragraph 2. Broker is neither entitled to compensation under this agreement nor obligated to represent the buyer in a transaction. What does that mean? Remember way back at the top where I said if a buyer had a pre-existing agreement, you would list it here in this line? What that's saying is if your client has a pre-existing agreement and then they have your agreement, and the buyer purchases a property that's affected by the first agreement, number one, they don't have to pay you. Makes sense. But number 2, it releases your representation and your agency rules around that property. That property, not covered by your agreement, is covered by the first agreement. The agency requirements, not covered by you, covered by the agent listed on that agreement. Okay. We're going to talk about disclosure as far as agency. That box comes auto-checked. That's part of your AD disclosure in the first section of the document. Possible dual agency, that's covered by PRBS, the first pages of your document. And then we're going to get into authorizations and obligations. I don't think there's going to be anything super surprising here in your duties, but it's going to break down what duties are within this agreement, or the new term, what is it? Broker involvement as covered by this agreement. So paragraph A talks all about, what you do as an agent, or some of the things that you do as an agent. Paragraph B says you will do an AVID. Not a big deal because we do that anyways as a matter of practice. Most brokerages require that in our, Northern California region. C, you're going to deliver or communicate to buyer disclosures, materials, information received in the personal possession of any personally known to the individual signing for broker during the representation period. You represented 2 people on the same house. You got a bit of disclosure for party A that went away. Now you've got party B on the same house. You've got a pile of file, for lack of a better term, on that house from the previous party. You're going to give it to the new people. Okay. You're going to be transparent. You're going to do everything in compliance with federal, state, and anti-discrimination laws. Now, not to let them off the hook, there's some things that the buyer needs to do with you in order not to breach the agreement. The buyer in good faith, I just lost my screen. Buyer in good faith agrees to timely review and consider properties that you send them to review and consider. They agree to negotiate in good faith to purchase a property. They agree to act in good faith towards completion of a contract. Okay, they don't just get to like do nothing, and they have some responsibility under the agreement as well. They agree within 5 or a selected number of days to show you that they're bona fide, to show you prequal letters, to show you verification of funds for down payment and closing costs. If they fail to provide that information or they don't qualify to acquire a property, then you can cancel the agreement. Right? Sorry. Can't be held to agency with you when you can't buy a property. In paragraph C, they're obligated and agree to read all documents that you give to them. They agree to seek assistance from professionals whose specialty may be whatever concern they might have. They agree to pay attention to what's in the buyer's investigation advisory. That means they agree to read it. And the buyer transactional advisory. That means they get to read those too. So this is double coverage for you. They have to sign it. Obviously, there's a signature line, but once again, they're agreeing to use those suggestions and those checklists to their advantage. They agree to pay for reports that you order in paragraph D. They agree to show up to meetings that you schedule for their benefit. Okay. They agree to notify you in writing on a CAR form that's sitting in the Zip Forms portfolio called the BMI of any material issues or concerns they have. And the guys, they're supposed to do that in advance. Okay. For example, these are buyer's material issues. Another way to think about those is the word deal killer, right? Here is my list of deal killers. The thing about them listing those is that we can avoid putting them in situations or transactions that could put them at a potential for financial risk because they didn't cancel when they found out about it, or they didn't research it enough, or whatever. But if they don't say anything, then how are we supposed to know, right? So if you, let's use train tracks. I had a train track episode last week. If you really, it's a deal killer for you to live within 1 mile of a train track, you should be letting me know that on the BMI form in advance. Airports, industrial zones. Some people don't like living in a close proximity to schools. All right. All of those things. Now, let's be really careful here when we're advising people to let us know about the material issues. Let's not get into anything that could be considered discriminatory. All right. Let's not get into anything. And when I say discriminatory, I'm talking about, race, religion, marital status, financial status, any of those things. So if somebody says, hey, look, man, I really don't want to live in a poor neighborhood, you should probably have them figure out another way to structure that sentence. Okay. I'm not going to go, I could go on with this one, but I'm not going to. All right. So they agree when they sign this agreement that if there's any big deal killers for them, AKA things they might sue you for later, they're going to tell you what they are. They're agreeing to do that. Where did it go? Professionals, good faith, buyer materials, incorrect, incomplete, or inaccurate information. 7F. Buyer agrees to indemnify you, hold harmless you from claims, disputes, litigation, judgments, attorney fees, and costs arising from any incorrect information supplied by the buyer or from material issues that the buyer fails to disclose to the broker in writing. Guys, paragraph E and F are enough, 7E and F, are enough to make me want to have every single person that wants me to show them a house sign the form. Okay. They always say that the gold on any disclosure is somewhere in the middle of the form and it's hidden. This is the gold for you, right? This is the gold for you. I'm suing you because I live next to railroad tracks. Oh, well, did you tell me that living next to railroad tracks would be hazardous to your health? No, I didn't. Oh, well, you agreed that you would before I put you in the house. So please go sue someone else now. Okay. Attorney's fees. This talks about what happens, who pays the attorney's fees. Everybody has to pay their own fees. Somebody decides to go get sue happy, everybody pays their own fees. It's never going to get to that because in paragraph 9 or item 9, we talk about how we're going to mediate everything in the real estate. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. 90% of issues that come up between buyers and sellers and their agent are resolved in mediation at the DRE. Okay. There's some items that are exempt from mediation in paragraph B. Paragraph 10 talks about any attached disclosures. The buyer transactional advisory, the buyer's investigation advisory, and the dual agency form are auto-checked on there. Given the squirrely nature of the market for the past 10 years, if you have somebody that's not real estate savvy, I might consider giving them the SBSA. And in addition to that, I might consider giving them the MCA, the Market Conditions Advisory, which basically says the price of the house really doesn't mean anything because tomorrow it's going to be different. It might go up, it might go down. You might make $1 million, you might lose $1 million. I don't know what's going to happen because I don't have a crystal ball, and it's buyer beware. That's the Market Conditions Advisory, right? Statewide seller, SBSA, you probably all know what it is, but if you don't, I'm going to say it anyways, okay? It basically says the 14-page big dog that says, you know what, if you don't do all of these things, you're going to die, right? So I think that those two forms, if you're worried about liability at all, or you're worried about the fact that, yeah, this buyer's a little bit squirrely, or, you know, I'm not sure, I don't want them to come after me, you might think about adding those two forms to this agreement. Okay. Oh, sorry. I scrolled on mine. I didn't scroll yours. It's right here. Okay. Entire agreement incorporates everything to an agreement and makes it official. If you've got an entity buyer, you're going to want to have them execute this with the RCSD. Everybody know what that is, and everybody know what an entity buyer is. Okay, good. Buyer signature, your signature. Then it gets into the advisories that it mentions are attached, the BTA, buyer transactional advisory, the BIA, the buyer's investigation advisory, and consumer privacy. They're going to get that. Is wire fraud in here? Got a little wire fraud going? No, that was probably in the beginning. This is the addendum that we were talking about that most of your agreements at this point in time are going to include. And Steve, thanks for asking about the minimum. I think that, you know, from here on out, the minimum will be included as well. But this basically says, look, the stuff on the front page doesn't really apply because I'm going to get a cooperating compensation. And this is where I'm spelling that out for you. The compensation is going to be paid via cooperating commissions posted in the MLS. In the event that the cooperating commission is waived, the buyer and the agent will discuss compensation offers in advance of writing any offer. i.e., I executed this and I couldn't find you a house. The whole world changed. Now I have to negotiate my commission directly with you. Before I write an offer, we're going to sit down and hash that out. You're going to have another addendum to your original agreement, or you're going to be executing a new agreement with a new set of terms, but at least you're covered there. Okay? Any questions? Comments? It's about the most fun you can have for an hour.
Hold my beer.
Hold your beer. Hold your beer. Okay, well, I hope that that helped, or at least kind of get you going on it and changes your thought process around what the form is and the things that are positive within the form, along with the things that are not so much fun in the form. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you have questions that come up along the way, please let me know. If you're getting ready to execute one of these for the first time and you're just not 100% sure, please let me know, and we'll go over it and make sure that you get something executed that works for that particular client. These things are going to be different per client. I just see that coming. I see a how do I say this without getting sued? I see a first-time home buyer executing a much different agreement than somebody that you're going to go out and show 2.5 to 3 million for. Okay, one size doesn't fit all. All right. Thanks for being here. Last call for questions, and then I'm going to hang up on you. You got 10 seconds.
How
If you have a
rude.
question, I know.
Thanks for that,
You're
Jamie.
right.
That was awesome.
Absolutely, anytime. Okay, I will see y'all soon.
Very much. Over and out.
Yep. Have a great afternoon. Have a great evening. I'll see y'all soon. Go sell a bunch. Bye.
Ah.